It started on the night of the first snowfall. We were supposed to spend the weekend curled up on the couch, wrapped in a shared blanket, arguing about whether to rewatch Love Actually or fall asleep halfway through Home Alone. Marissa loved Christmas. She went all out every year, homemade garlands, cinnamon candles, that one ugly wreath with googly eyes she swore brought good luck. She had this tradition where she'd put marshmallows in my coffee without asking. She said it was to soften my soul. I always rolled my eyes but drank it anyway. That was just us. Quiet chaos. Little jokes. A rhythm. She started with what we thought was just a cold. Some mild chills, a scratchy throat, the sniffles. She said she felt a little run down, and we blamed it on work. She was a teacher, and December always meant cranky kids, tired teachers, and enough stress to fuel a city. But then it got worse. By the second day, she was coughing so hard she couldn't speak between gasps. I begged her to go to urgent care, but she just waved me off. It's nothing. I just need rest, she said. Stubborn as hell, like always. That night, I woke up to the sound of her struggling to breathe. She was sitting on the floor of the bathroom, her back against the wall, drenched in sweat and clutching her chest. Her skin was pale, and her lips had a terrifying bluish tint. I'd never moved so fast in my life. I called 911 with shaking hands while trying to keep her upright and conscious. When the ambulance arrived, they took one look at her vitals and rushed her out the door. I wasn't allowed to ride with her because of new protocols. I followed behind in my car, trying not to hyperventilate or crash at every red light. I kept hearing her cough echo in my ears, even though she was already gone from my passenger seat. They admitted her straight into ICU. She had influenza A severe. Both lungs were filling with fluid. They put her on max oxygen, but even that wasn't enough. She already had asthma, and the virus attacked her like it knew exactly where to hit hardest. Her oxygen levels dropped so low they said it was dangerous to keep her awake. They needed to intubate, sedate, and eventually paralyze her. Medically induced coma, the doctor said, like it was a normal thing. Like it wasn't the most terrifying phrase I'd ever heard in my life. I signed the forms. My hands were cold. My heart was somewhere in my throat. I wanted to scream. I wanted to yank her off that bed and take her home. I wanted a second chance to make her go to the doctor 2 days ago. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was her oxygen level. The magical number, 90. As long as she stayed above that, she had a fighting chance. I watched the monitor like it was a holy relic. 91, 92, 98. The numbers changed every few seconds, and each shift felt like a punch or a prayer. The room smelled like antiseptic and humming machines. Her body laid still under white blankets, tubes weaving in and out of her like some sci-fi nightmare. There was one in her neck, her jugular. I had to stop looking at it, or I'd fall apart completely. I sat beside her, whispering things I wish I'd said louder when she was well. That I loved her more than I let on. That I was sorry for every stupid argument. That I was here, and I wasn't going anywhere. No one teaches you how to speak to someone in a coma. Do you talk like they're awake? Do you tell them stories? Do you say goodbye just in case? I told her everything. I told her how I still had the receipt from our first date tucked in the back of my wallet. How the cat wouldn't stop meowing at the front door like she knew something was wrong. How her mom called 3 times in an hour, crying because she couldn't get a flight out until morning. I told her I missed her voice, her sarcasm, her messy buns, her oversized hoodies, and the way she always stole the blanket in the middle of the night. And I told her that I wasn't ready for a world without her in it. The ICU has its own version of time. Minutes stretch into eternities. Every beep from a machine feels like it means something, sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes just a cruel tease. I began to recognize the rhythm of the machines like a song I never wanted to learn. I stopped checking my phone. I stopped eating. I sat. I watched. I waited. Day 3 brought the first crack of light. They told me her oxygen saturation was holding steady, and they were going to reduce the ventilator support from 100 down to 60. It's a good sign, the nurse said with a soft smile that looked practiced. She's moving in the right direction. I remember nodding, then immediately looking at Marissa. Her body still hadn't moved. Her chest rose and fell in sync with the machine, but there was no life in her face. The girl who once danced in our kitchen in mismatched socks now looked like a mannequin dressed in hospital linens. Her mom arrived that afternoon. She walked into the room quietly and froze. Her hand covered her mouth. I could see her whole soul break behind her eyes. She whispered, "Baby girl," and sat down next to me. We didn't speak much. Just held her hands, one on each side of the bed. 2 anchors trying to keep her tethered to this world. That night, I whispered to Marissa that I loved her, that she wasn't allowed to leave me like this. And as I said the words, something happened. A single tear rolled down her cheek. The nurse said it was probably just a reflex. Sometimes the body does that, she said. It doesn't necessarily mean. But I didn't let her finish, because I knew that was her. The next day, they said if she stayed stable overnight, they'd begin phasing out the paralytics. Her oxygen was bouncing between 92 and 95. The numbers I once feared were now numbers I celebrated like a touchdown. Every percentage point was hope. Every breath, a miracle. I brought in her favorite playlist, Fleetwood Mac, Hozier, the occasional weird synth-pop band she liked to dance to when she thought no one was watching. I played it through a little speaker next to her ear. I told her what day it was. I read her text from friends. Her coworker Ashley sent a voice message. I held the phone near her and hoped she could hear the love woven between every syllable. Day 5 came. The paralytic was off. She twitched. A finger curled. A foot jerked under the blanket. Her eyebrows furrowed like she was having a strange dream. Her body was hers again, but she wasn't awake. It was like watching someone walk through thick fog, just out of reach. That day, her face turned bright red. I panicked. The doctors reassured me it was likely from the steroids still in her system. It's normal in some patients, they said, but I could tell even they were keeping one eye on her vitals. She held at 91% oxygen. Still okay. The ventilator dropped down to 35%. I started reading our favorite book to her again, the one we'd started on a beach vacation 2 years ago and never finished. She teased me then, saying I was too slow a reader. You'd get through more chapters if you didn't stop to do dramatic voices, she'd joke. So I did the voices again, just in case she could hear me. On day 6, the nurse said her name out loud, and for the briefest moment, her eyes opened, then closed again. But they opened. Even the nurse gasped. That's a response, she whispered. She's still in there. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat by her side and stared at her until the morning came. Her body had started taking spontaneous breaths, initiating them on her own, without the machine forcing it. Her body's remembering what to do, the doctor told me. We'll take it step by step. But for me, that wasn't a step. That was a leap. Every small thing felt huge. Every twitch, every breath, every flutter of her eyelashes. We weren't just in a hospital room. We were standing at the edge of a cliff, and for the first time, I could feel the wind shifting in our favor. Day 7 started with cautious optimism. The sun actually peeked through the tiny window in Marissa's ICU room, a rarity. I sat on that same cracked vinyl chair, running my hand along the edge of the blanket that covered her. The nurse smiled at me when she came in. Today might be another good day, she said softly. They began reducing the sedation. First the fentanyl, then gradually tapering off the rest. Marissa started to stir slowly, then suddenly. Her head turned, her lips twitched, her legs shifted under the sheets. For a few surreal seconds, I thought she might open her eyes again and say something. But instead, her body started moving in ways that didn't look voluntary. Jerky, uncontrolled, unsettling. Her arms shot upward. Her back arched. Her fingers curled like claws into the hospital mattress. The nurse calmly reached for medication. I, on the other hand, froze. Don't panic, she said, sensing my fear. It's likely her brain reconnecting. She's been through a lot. But watching her like that, thrashing, fighting, clearly distressed, was gut-wrenching. She wasn't in a coma anymore. She was somewhere between worlds. Awake, but not fully here. Later that afternoon, doctors confirmed she was battling more than just the flu. Alongside the influenza, she now had bacterial pneumonia, and they suspected a staph infection had entered her system too. On top of that, her kidneys weren't working properly. Renal failure. Every time I thought we'd turned a corner, something else reared its head. She had 5 different battles inside her body and couldn't even ask for help. Couldn't tell us what hurt, where, or how bad. And I just stood there, a useless bystander in the fight for her life. That night, she reacted violently when the respiratory therapist tried to suction her lungs. Her oxygen plummeted. Her heart rate spiked. They had to turn the ventilator back up to 60. I stood outside the room, fists clenched, listening to alarms blaring. When I came back in, she was calmer. Her vitals had stabilized, and they'd brought the vent back down to 35. But her face was red and wet, like she'd been crying without even knowing why. I sat down, took her hand, talked to her. And this time, she responded. Not with words. But she stopped thrashing. Her fingers relaxed under mine. Her breathing, still mechanical, became slower, more rhythmic. Like my voice was a faint light in the fog, something she could still follow. On day 8, the hospital told me they had to move her. The ICU was beyond capacity, and they were putting 2 patients per room. Too many flu cases. Too many emergencies. Too many people like us, stuck in this holiday horror show. They gave her a light dose of fentanyl again to make the transfer easier. Watching them wheel her away was like watching someone carry your entire world through a storm, and knowing you just had to trust they'd bring it back. The new hospital was quieter. Smaller. The staff had soft voices and kind eyes, but I hated everything about starting over. Her machines looked different. Her room smelled different. But she was the same. Just lying there. Still fighting. That night, the nurse told me they might remove the breathing tube on Monday if her progress held steady. I didn't even know what day it was anymore. Monday felt like another lifetime. On day 9, they lowered her PEEP number to 10, a major milestone. Then something happened that broke me in a completely different way. She was awake enough to follow a question. The nurse leaned in and asked softly, "Marissa, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened, glazed but aware. And she nodded. Just a small, slow nod. But it shattered something in me. I grabbed her hand. "You see me?" Another nod. I didn't know what to say. I laughed and cried at the same time. The nurse handed me tissues I didn't ask for. For the first time in nearly 2 weeks, I could feel her presence in the room again. Not her shell, not her body. Her. The doctor came in later and confirmed what I already knew in my gut. "If she holds steady tonight," he said, "we'll remove the ventilator tomorrow." Tomorrow. I didn't leave her side that night. I sat there with my head against the bed, telling her all the things I'd memorized from our past. The names of our favorite diners. The dumb song we sang in the car that one summer. The inside jokes no one else would get. I told her she was almost home. Day 10 was the day I thought I'd finally hear her voice again. I woke up in the hospital chair with a crick in my neck and a heart full of shaky hope. The night nurse gave me a thumbs up when I asked about her oxygen levels. "She's ready," she said. "It's looking good." They were planning to extubate, take out the breathing tube. It had been nearly 2 weeks since Marissa had spoken, since her mouth had formed a single word. I imagined it 1,000 different ways. Maybe she'd whisper, "Hey," or say my name, or crack a raspy joke. I didn't care. I just wanted proof that she was still her. The doctor came in. He checked her stats, her reflexes, her pupils. He nodded, then paused. He touched her neck, examined her throat, checked her tongue and mouth with a small flashlight, and then shook his head. Her throat was too swollen, far too inflamed to safely remove the tube. "It could be dangerous to force it," he said gently, looking at me like he'd said this sentence too many times this month. "We're going to give it more time. Bring the swelling down. Reassess tomorrow." It was like being told Christmas was canceled as a child, but instead of toys, you were waiting for a voice. I sat there stunned, nodding like I understood, but inside something cracked. The air in the room suddenly felt heavier. Like hope had gotten caught in her throat, too. And then the thrashing started again. Marissa's body jolted violently, not from pain, not from seizures, but something in between. Her hands swiped at the air. Her legs kicked. Her back arched off the bed as if her body wanted to run but had nowhere to go. The nurses rushed in, adjusted her meds, tried to soothe her. I stood helpless, whispering, "It's okay, baby. I'm here, it's okay," over and over like a prayer. But it didn't help. She couldn't see me, couldn't hear me. And worse, her own movements were making her condition harder to treat. The thrashing irritated her throat more, compounding the very reason they couldn't take the tube out in the first place. That night, I placed a pillow next to her head to keep her from slamming it against the metal rails. I held her wrist when her fingers curled into claws again. Her eyes would open in terror, darting around, then glaze over again. She wasn't there, not fully, but she wasn't gone either. The doctors told me she was experiencing ICU delirium, a common condition for patients who have been sedated, intubated, and isolated for so long. The brain loses its grip on time and reality. Hallucinations, confusion, panic, all of it normal. But knowing that didn't make it easier to watch. On day 11, they tried again to assess the swelling. Still too risky. Her vitals were stable, but her body was restless. She hadn't slept well. Neither had I. They began slowly weaning her off propofol, another sedative, in hopes that she'd become more responsive, more aware. But the more they pulled back the meds, the more violent the delirium became. The doctors warned that while they were close to removing the tube, the erratic movements and the risk of aspiration made it too dangerous. She could choke if her mind and body weren't in sync. Every win felt like it came with a fine print warning. One night, I brought in a framed photo of us from 2 summers ago, her in a straw hat, licking an ice cream cone, laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. I propped it on the bedside table and hoped some part of her would remember who she was, who we were. I slowed down on posting updates after that. It was hard explaining the back and forth. The almost S. The maybe tomorrow S. People were still checking in, sending kind messages. Some even offered to come sit with me. But I declined. I wanted her to wake up and see only me, one familiar face in the haze of machines and white coats. By day 12, they decided to give her Benadryl to calm the physical side effects of several drugs they now suspected were clashing in her system. Some of the sedatives had triggered dyskinesia, a rare side effect that caused uncontrolled movements, including her tongue forcing itself out of her mouth, her jaw locking at times. It was terrifying. I asked the doctor point blank, "Is this permanent?" He looked at me, sighed, and said, "It's too early to say." That answer broke me more than a yes ever could. I sat with her that night, quietly crying into my mask, trying not to let her see. But I think she did. Her eyes flicked toward me, and for the first time, I saw something more than confusion. I saw pain and fear. I whispered, "I'm sorry. I know I look like a mess. But I'm here. I'm staying right here." Then I told her about all the strangers online cheering for her. The people who prayed, who messaged, who cried with me in comment sections. I told her how much the world had rallied behind her without ever knowing her name. And her lips, dry and chapped, trembled. I don't know if it was emotion or just a tremor, but in that moment it was enough, because she was still fighting. Day 13 came and went in silence. The doctors were still hesitant. The swelling in Marissa's throat had gone down a bit, but not enough. The dyskinesia was still present, though more controlled now with Benadryl. Her limbs didn't jerk as much. Her tongue no longer pushed violently from her mouth. She was quieter, more still, but also more distant. I started talking to her again. Really talking. I told her about the way her students had asked about her, how her mom cried every time she left the room. I played her voicemails from old friends. I read her the comment sections. Some messages were just a few words. "We're pulling for you, Marissa." Others were paragraphs, strangers sharing their own ICU stories, telling me to hold on. I told her she wasn't just loved, she was witnessed. On day 14, something shifted. The tremors in her arms stopped. She tracked me with her eyes longer. Her lips moved when I spoke, not quite forming words, but trying. She gripped my fingers. I asked her if she knew who I was, and she blinked once. Slowly, deliberately. I asked her again. This time, she blinked twice. Her version of a smile. That was the first night I dared to believe we might actually get out of this. And then, day 15. It started like all the others. Early rounds, blood pressure checks, vitals, quiet voices. The doctor pulled me aside. "We're going to try again today," he said. "She's stronger. Her responses are good. Her lungs are doing most of the work. If all goes well, she could speak." They began preparations just before noon. I stood by the window, pacing. When the nurse came in, I grabbed Marissa's hand and whispered, "It's time." The removal of the tube was fast, clinical, practiced. But to me it felt like hours. Her body twitched. Her eyes watered. Her lips trembled. Then she coughed violently, but it was her own cough. No machine. No assistance. She blinked. Gasped. Her mouth opened. Her voice was hoarse and raw, like someone who'd screamed through a storm. But she said it. She looked at me and whispered, "Water." It was the most beautiful word I'd ever heard. The nurse helped her take a few sips. She winced, but managed. Her lips quivered again, and she whispered, "What day is it?" I laughed. I cried. I almost collapsed on the floor. "You're talking," I said, kneeling beside her. "You're here." She nodded slowly, still groggy, but present. "Feels like forever." "It was close," I told her. "But you made it back." I held her hand and told her everything, about the days she was unresponsive, about the ventilator, the infection, the kidney issues, the thrashing, the tears. About the moment I saw that single tear roll down her cheek, and how I knew she was still in there. She listened, wide-eyed, every breath still labored, but stronger than before. Then I told her about the people, the strangers, the comments, the prayers, the Reddit thread that exploded with support from all over the world. How people she'd never met sat up at night wondering if she'd pull through. She cried. It started slowly, just a few tears, But then her chest heaved, her shoulders shook, and her voice cracked. I didn't know people cared that much. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "You have no idea." The doctor came in and explained that she'd be moved to the ward once she passed her swallowing test. No more ICU. No more machines. Just healing. Recovery. Time. And she passed the test. The nurse wheeled her out of ICU that afternoon. I walked beside her, holding her hand. The hallway looked brighter. The air less sterile. The world a little more intact. In her new room, Marissa turned to me and rasped, "So, what did I miss?" I smirked. Everything. And also, nothing at all. Because somehow, even after everything, she was still her. Still the girl who rolled her eyes at my dramatic book voices. Still the woman who laughed at my burnt toast. Still the love of my life. Later that night, I watched her sleep peacefully, no machines, no wires, no alarms. Just steady breaths and the sound of her dreams pulling her home. And I thought about how close we came to losing all of this. About how fragile life really is. About how a stupid virus almost stole everything. And about how, sometimes, love doesn't look like grand gestures or perfect moments. Sometimes, love is just sitting in a cold plastic chair for 15 days, whispering stories to someone who can't answer, and hoping they find their way back to you.